So, welcome. My name's Joe. Thanks for taking the time to join us on this webinar, Engaging Your Supply Chain in Singapore. If you're joining us from outside of Singapore, I'm sure you'll learn a lot of things as well. I'm joined by Sim Keng Chong from Foo Kon Tan, and I'll refer to Sim Keng as a KC from throughout the webinar, and Mun Wei from SustainableSG, who are our partners in the region. So thank you both for taking the time out to join us today for this particular webinar. So it will be recorded, so everyone that is participating and registering will get a copy of this. We'll use chat if you want to put questions in the chat at any time, and there'll be a couple of polls as we move through that. We'll also have some opportunity for question and answer at the end as well, and then some free resources and downloads that will be shared with you after the session. If you do have any troubles technically at all, please email throughout the session the info@unitiveimpact.com, and we will dive into the session. So, the key things that we really want to look at today is really understanding Scope 3 emissions and their role in the climate planning and climate-related disclosures space. Have a think about how we can identify and prioritise ethical sourcing and looking at supply chain hotspots and why that's important. And then also having some discussion and exploring some practical tools for supplier engagement around emissions and ESG data collection. So they're the three key areas that we're going to be exploring today in the webinar. So just a little bit of discussion around, why business action is required on carbon footprint and why it matters. So yeah, I thought I'd start maybe with UKC. We've had some discussions during the prep there that some businesses have slowed some of their ESG efforts, and there have been some delays around Singapore's mandatory regulatory disclosure rollout there. Why do you feel like it's still urgent to act on some of these matters now, whether you're in that mandatory group or in the voluntary space?
Right. Thanks, Joe. So I think most of us in Singapore know that more recently the exchange and together with ACRA and MAS, they have kind of announced the deferment of the requirements to for ESG reporting, right? For depending on the market cap of the company, right? I think for some of them, it can be postponed to as far as 2030, right? So that gives us a good 4 to 5 years more to try to comply. So, but I think companies shouldn't be taking a back seat because there's quite a lot to do, right? I mean, if we were to look at the new reporting requirements based on IFRS S1 and S2 is actually a lot more demanding than the current framework that we are reporting under, which is primarily GRI and TCFD. So there's a lot to do, in particular relating to areas of strategies and also governance, right? So I think whilst TCFD has been in place, or companies are required to implement them as of now, most of them are still phasing this out in terms of the implementation. So as part of our internal review performed on some listed companies, it's quite apparent that many of the SMEs are still not really ready for TCFD reporting. So I think it's something that companies have to really expedite this process because as we know, S1 and S2, they are built based on TCFD framework, and if you are able to expedite the compliance with TCFD, that would actually smoothen your path in terms of trying to adopt S1 and S2 later. So I think, of course, there are other considerations like managing your stakeholders' expectations, not just for compliance purposes, but maybe dealing with your banks, financial institutions, or even your vendors suppliers who may be requiring a lot more ESG reporting from you. So I think companies should just embrace the importance of ESG reporting and do what is right rather than waiting for the time to come and start to rush towards the last minute.
Absolutely. Thanks, Casey. Moon Wei, from your client experience, and what are some of the real world consequences of delaying action in this area, especially in the supply chain?
Yeah, I can think of a couple of things. So one, building on what Casey mentioned. So if you kind of kick the can down the road, then and kind of start work as late as possible, it's also then you could be in a situation where everyone's rushing for the same resources, right? In terms of hiring consultants, purchasing software, and going for verification and so on. So, and because of this kind of this tsunami of demand, then the cost will go up. Yeah. So, and really starting early really allows you to adopt a kind of a phased approach, and it's probably more cost effective as well. And then, and the second thing, and which is again what Casey kind of alluded to, is also that really, I think we're also entering an era where you do reporting, you do you want to measure your emissions and so on. It's not only for compliance. It's also I think the market is changing. So and we do see a lot of the particularly the bigger companies and MNCs, they're really requiring all kinds of ESG related data and disclosures from their suppliers. And I certainly know of some local companies who are in a situation where they might be dropped, right? Say from some of these tender or quotation opportunities, because they're really not ESG ready, right? So, and then which means they cannot provide all the necessary data and so on. So yeah, you really don't want to be in a situation whereby because you are not proactive on ESG, and that actually impacts your position in the market.
Absolutely. So the key message really is about starting early, whether you're either mandatory or voluntary, and building that capacity, because it's a journey, right? It's over time that's is important, and obviously from a climate change perspective, things aren't slowing down on that front. So key to keep moving. So let's shift maybe to this core of the topic today, which is really about engaging the supply chain. And so. KC, what are some of the, how are large organizations already pushing ESG requirements down to smaller suppliers? What have you seen in this space?
Yep. So I think it's true that there's an increasing trend that the large organizations, including MNCs and government agencies, ministries, and state boards, who are pushing these requirements to smaller suppliers, right? So as Manwai mentioned earlier, right? I mean, some of them, they have quite stringent requirements for qualifying suppliers based on ESG criteria. So some of them, they have been requiring this through contracts with the suppliers, like providing certain GHG emission data, or at least having some environmental or sustainability policy, and also meeting minimum labor, safety, and human rights standards. In particular, when you are dealing with, MNCs from the US or in the UK, right? And they also putting on upon this suppliers to agree to audits, ESG audits, and to meet the reporting requirements, even filling up questionnaires and uploading data periodically, right? So I think also back to what Manwai has mentioned earlier, a lot of these large organizations are starting to implement carbon-based procurement rules, which means they would consider things like your carbon intensity as a weighted factor in supplier selection, and maybe even to the extent of requiring product level carbon footprints. How much carbon emission do you emit from producing this product or service, and even requiring low carbon materials or logistics solutions. So I think in a nutshell, I think carbon pricing is added to tenders, in a way of not just the real cost of supplies, but also this imputed carbon price that is going to determine your competitiveness, not just the real pricing now. So at the end of the day, I think there's this real trend, and as we mentioned earlier, organizations will have to get ready for that. Otherwise, you're going to lose out in terms of securing contracts from these organizations.
Absolutely. Mun Wei, what are you seeing? Like, if we sort of focused a little bit on export markets or export market expectations, how are you seeing Singaporean SMEs respond in this regard? Well, I think you're on mute there, Mun Wei.
So I'll look at it in two ways. So one is really understanding what are some of the ESG related requirements in the markets you're exporting to. So I think as listed in the slides, in this slide, in point number 2. So maybe let me just unpack the two important acronyms there. So one is the CSRD. So that's the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So so this is actually a reporting requirement that applies primarily to EU companies, but at the same time, it's also extended to non-EU companies if you have a significant presence, in the market. So that's why if you're up and coming, you're promising local enterprise and the EU is a important growth market for you, then you have to be mindful, right? So you might kind of fall into a threshold whereby you need to report. Okay, then the other acronym is CBAM. So that's a Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. So whereby, and this is actually a EU policy that puts a carbon price on certain imported goods. Okay, so this is really to prevent what they call carbon leakage. Okay, so that's why if let's say, and if you are really a manufacturer of certain products like iron, steel, and cement, then you would be subject to this CBAM mechanism, and you need to be aware. Okay, so that is kind of the mandatory part, right? So but I think maybe I just share a story. So because for some years we've been working with this local company in Singapore that they manufacture plastic bags. Yeah, and the MD is actually quite forward looking because he does see that there's actually increasing demand from the local and regional markets. Really for whereby he gets customers asking, are your bags made of recycled content, basically recycled resin? So what he's doing now is he's actually applying for certification of his products, right? So by a third party, so really to attest to the fact that he does use a fairly high percentage of recycled resin in his products. So because he thinks that gives him a competitive advantage. Yeah. So just to recap, I think that's that kind of the mandatory part, understanding what are some of the regulations in the export markets. Then there's also the voluntary part, right? Say in terms of perhaps getting certain certifications that can help you stay ahead, right? In certain for certain export products or markets.
Yeah. Excellent. That's good. I know a lot of people are across GHG emissions, but for those that aren't, maybe Mun Wei, if you could maybe just provide a sort of a simple overview, and especially kind of lasering on scope 3, because that's obviously where we start to hit the supply chain, right?
Yeah. Okay. I think this diagram is really very good. So because in a way it's color coded, right? So and there's this I think the descriptor says reporting company. Right. So basically, scope 3 emissions are emissions that occur outside your organization. Yeah. So and is classified into 8 categories of what they call upstream emissions and 7 categories of downstream emissions. Altogether, there are 15 categories of scope 3 emissions. So they include things like, say, how let's say you are distributing products. Right, then how those products are used, and downstream will include, see, there's this category, it says a use of sold products. Say, let's say, for instance, you make LED lights, So when your customers buy the lights from you and they use it in their homes or their offices, right? They consume electricity, right, to power the lights. Then that's actually considered under that use of sold products. So that is something that's reportable by you, right? Okay. So and something to bear in mind is that really starting on scope 3 is a long-term journey. Yeah. So and most companies they do it in a progressive manner. Yeah. Say for instance, for Malaysian listed companies, currently now they have to report two categories of scope 3 emissions, which are relatively easier to collect in terms of the data. So that's employee commuting, right? So you see it on the left side of the scope 3 as well as business travel. Yeah. So, but in general, scope 3 emissions are harder to measure for three reasons. So one is that it's really the data availability. So because very often you don't own the data, so you really have to ask for it from your suppliers and partners, or you have to measure it, right? In the case of, let's say, employee commuting. Okay. And two is complexity. Let's say you are distributing widgets and then, or maybe laptops, right? And then you need to know what is the carbon footprint of your laptops, or as well as the other IT equipment. Then you really have to you can do it yourself. I mean, there's a process to map out the carbon footprint of a specific product, or you really have to chase all your different suppliers for all the data. Yeah. And three is that there's also underlying the scope 3 emissions are also a methodology, right? So this methodology is called a JG protocol, right? So then you go to the website, you can download all they have a few guides, and it is quite, I would say if you are starting out, it can be quite intimidating, right? So and it's also, so it's important to really understand really all the nuances and get started. Yeah, so but it's quite complex. So which is why really if you want to embark on scope 3 measurements, then you need to either self-learn, you go for training, or you have to hire someone to help you with the journey. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, that's great. So thank you for those practical examples there as well. Munway, certainly with the clients that we work with, obviously you start with scope 1 and 2, that's the easier piece, and then you start the journey incrementally of moving, into scope 3 and working through that. We'll just hear a couple of slide shots here because we'll talk about tools throughout the journey. So one of the tools that we use is Workkeeper Carbon. And so you can use tools to help you build a greenhouse gas inventory that can help accelerate and automate a lot of the work and drive a lot of efficiency. So, there's a couple of ways of doing that just helps using software to help simplify that process as well. If you're trying to build an inventory and build some internal capability, software can definitely help in that regard. If we have a think about scope 3 and suppliers, what are the first things a business needs to do internally, KC, before asking suppliers for emissions data? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, Joe. So I think there are a few things. Of course, you need to know what data are you collecting. I mean, what purpose is this for? Maybe you want to check with your supplier. Are you using this for to track your overall emissions, and then for what reporting purpose, so that we can make sure that the data we decide to track, it's aligned with the reporting framework, right? So at least to know what is their purpose, right? And then of course there are 15 category of scope 3 emissions, as you mentioned earlier. So which ones are we prioritizing, right? Is it based on what the regulations require? Like, for example, it was mentioned earlier that employee travel and employee commuting and business travel. So are there other criteria, or should we be looking at whether it's based on the more strategic suppliers, although the supply volume or value now is low, but you foresee to engage them in the longer run. Presumably your emission, from this supply, working with this supply will be more material to them over the long run. So I think there's a number of considerations. Of course, you need to make sure that you know what they need, and then the framework they are reporting based on, so that we can supply the accurate data to them.
Yeah, absolutely. One way, when a lot of us are working in small business as well, and when you look at your supplier list, sometimes it gets a little bit scary because you see hundreds of suppliers, right? So what's your advice for choosing which suppliers to focus on, and especially for companies that have, loads of suppliers and also limited capacity?
Yeah, maybe I would suggest kind of three things or three tips. So first is really perhaps it's good to start with the suppliers where you spend the most money. Yeah. So because to a certain extent, your spending does correlate with your emissions. And also to be practical, because you're spending quite a bit of money with, let's say, one or two suppliers, then they want to keep your business. So they are more likely to they are more likely to be more responsive, right, with the carbon and other ESG data that you ask for. Okay. Then the second tip is perhaps to look at suppliers which are in carbon intensive sectors, right? Say like metals, chemicals, or even airlines, right? So because, and why you want to do that is because these are also likely to be categories of Scope 3 emissions which are relatively higher. Yeah. And the third tip is to be pragmatic, right? So basically, because at the end of the day, Joe, as you rightly pointed out, we all work with multiple suppliers. So I think it's good to start with suppliers who are carbon ready. Yeah. So, and that means, of course, we are notwithstanding the first two things that I mentioned. So then if let's say one particular supplier has the data, right? And in fact, it's very welcoming and say, oh, are there other ESG data that you want? So because I think the important thing about Scope 3, because of the complexity, is really to get started and build upon your early success. And also because it's quite a complex journey. So, and then you can learn along the way as well.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think if we have a look here, just again, the use of tools just to kind of get, upload your suppliers, and you kind of see where your spend is and where your emissions intensity, and that starts to give you an idea of where you might start from a planning perspective. And so we'll talk a little bit more about hotspot analysis coming forward. But, as with any sort of, major change and, rolling out these types of things, there are challenges. And, so there's some top challenges that were put on the screen there. But KC, you and your firm, you've done a lot of, audit and auditing processes across companies. Which of these challenges, or are there any others that you see more often, and why?
Yep. So I think most of us would acknowledge that one of the greatest challenge is suppliers, having limited or lacking the ESG data, that we need to report, or one of the 15 categories, right? So, and suppliers cannot provide even some Scope 1 and Scope 2 data, and they do not have a structured or systematic way and tools or systems to track the carbon emissions. So the data given can be, incomplete, inconsistent, or highly estimated, due to the lack of a structured approach, right? And of course, then some of them may have difficulty providing even a product level carbon emissions footprint. So these are some of the challenges. And of course, there's also a maturity gap between suppliers. Some are very advanced, and some are really near to zero maturity. Not even aware of what ESG about, ESG reporting, and then this is of course then you have to really engage them and educate them as well to help them along, right? So and of course there's also tendency for suppliers to push back, right? Resistance, and they may deem the ESG request as admin work or finance related accounting matters. Why are you coming to us? I'm just supplying you materials or services. So and of course requirements can differ between different customers for them. So why would they cater just for you, right? So these are just some of the challenges that we heard from our clients in coming up with, in getting the suppliers to cooperate, right? So of course, I think we also know that for companies who are having this, difficulty in obtaining supply data, the other way, if you look at the GSG protocol, is for them to start off with the spend method to compute the carbon emission, right? So based on the value of the purchase, they could actually, work out the carbon emission. So that is a very good baby step, for companies to at least, try to estimate if they are having challenges getting supplier to provide any data. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So start maybe with those spend-based proxies, and then as over time try to get that more activity-based
Right.
data from your suppliers. It can also be hard, can't it, when you've got when you're the small supplier and you're seeking data requests to bigger suppliers as well. It's usually a bit easier if you're the larger one requesting from the smaller. So that can be a challenge there. Munway, what strategies have worked for you with the work that you've done in overcoming those challenges, especially where the capability of that supplier or the data quality is low?
Yeah, I do agree. I totally agree with Casey that I mean, really sometimes you have to look at what are some alternatives, say spend-based or average data. I think these are good things to start with because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is really to establish a baseline, right? So and it's good to take a progressive view. So in the sense that once you have established the baseline, then the task ahead is really to improve on the quality of the data year on year. Okay, then the other thing which I think has worked well for some companies is really to provide support to their suppliers. Yeah. So then I know of a couple of companies. So what they do is that they actually they sponsor workshops. Yeah. So that means they engage a trainer, right? And they get all their suppliers together, and then they'll pay for the workshop, right? So then that way is a good way to level up, right? Their suppliers in terms of the knowledge of the carbon accounting, right? And then also to really get some feedback, right? In terms of what are some of the pain points that the suppliers might have. Yeah. So I think something like that is a worthwhile investment for the companies. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They're good, very practical suggestions. For the participants, there is a poll going on there, so feel free to do that. But then also feel free to put questions into the chat. We will monitor those and try and get to those throughout the discussion. What are some of the things, KC, that a business needs to do internally, do you think, before, as they're planning for getting data and engaging their suppliers? We've talked about a few of these things on the screen already, but is there anything else you'd add in terms of internal preparation?
Yeah, I think most of the points are kind of summarized on the slide, but I think getting procurement team to be involved early is I would say one of the critical success factor, right? Because procurement people are the first point of contact, right, with your suppliers. So they maintain the relationship with them, your suppliers, and they can better communicate the expectations and advise on which are the suppliers you should prioritize on, right? And then, of course, to also work with suppliers, as what Mun mentioned earlier, to support and help develop the suppliers' capabilities in this area, right? So working with consultants to help support them as a group, so that we can get this, the main suppliers that you're working closely with to kind of provide more accurate data over time, right? So I think that's a good point on getting procurement team early, right? Of course, I think setting up simple way to collect data, be it I think a spreadsheet or some kind of carbon software, that's also important because at the end of the day, everyone are busy with the operations, right? So you need something that is simple enough, to capture data. So I think that is one of the, even for suppliers to access online so that they can actually submit the data and then without you going to them. So I think that free up a lot of redundant interaction, toing and froing of data. Yep.
Yeah, and that's important. So you're getting that procurement support as well in the Scope 3 space there. Mun Wei, what have you seen in terms of maybe some advice for SMEs around some low barrier ways for SMEs to collect supplier data without, that being overwhelming for their teams or the vendors?
Yeah. Actually, earlier this morning, because for my business, I had to renew my G-based supplier certification. And then I realized actually the government portal asks me for certain data, right? So like for instance, I have to submit my financial spreadsheet and so on. So that's why when you asked that question, Joe, then I was thinking whether that perhaps companies can try to piggyback on their existing processes, right? Say because I think in general, companies do ask for data or certain information, or they pre-qualify their suppliers and so on. So then think about whether you can integrate this, right? Adopt a kind of integrated approach, right? So as part of the process, you ask for some ESG related information, right? Then it's easier for you. It's also easier for your suppliers as well. Yeah, and the other thing, and we kind of touch on it, based on the couple of points that were shared, is that really not everybody is on the same page in terms of ESG or carbon readiness. So then, and with that in mind, I would suggest adopting a tiered approach, right? Say whereby really for suppliers that are a lot more sophisticated, they have the data on hand, right? Then you can actually ask them for more things. Yeah. Whereas if you look at the long tail, perhaps of the smaller suppliers and so on, then we might need to adopt a different approach, which is really more spend-based. And if we think about it, if we use a spend-based approach, technically we might not even need any data from the suppliers, because all we need is really how much money we spend on these suppliers, and then of course with the source for the relevant emission factors. Okay, then perhaps one more comment is I think I think that companies should practice what they preach, right? So in the sense that much as we ask for data from our suppliers, but I think we also need to track, right? What are we consuming, right? Our Scope 1 and Scope 2. And also something to bear in mind is that because I think we all know that the product carbon footprint process is quite complicated, right? But the GHG protocol actually have a specific product standard, right? So then for those companies that are in the product space, so I really strongly encourage you to take a look, to download the standard and take a crack at it, right? So because in learning and trying to adopt it for your own products, then I think you also build up your knowledge. You also understand what are the data you need to collect. So and I think that actually would facilitate your discussions with your suppliers as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's always so many different things to learn, but implementing those bit by bit, that process that you just highlighted can help kind of be a part of that life cycle analysis on the products that that you're doing if you're a product company. Yeah, that's good. So, Casey, do you want to maybe just talk just briefly around how all of this links into the Singapore disclosure frameworks? Obviously, there's mandatory for listed companies and adoption is tiered according to market cap, but just a few comments there before we move on.
Yeah, so I think in terms of how it's being tiered, I'm not going through the details, but of course, the regulators are assuming that the indexed group of companies, right? These are the larger ones, could be GLCs who have the resources to be the early adopters, right? And to of course, as a larger organization, they also have the right better bargaining power to request the suppliers to provide Scope 3 emission data to make their overall Scope 1 and Scope 2, including Scope 3, emissions more complete, right? So I think that's something, if you think about, it's very realistic, right? So and of course then we have the mid cap and the small cap companies, right? So these are given more time. So I think if you look at it, this is how the regulators tier the capabilities and the readiness of these companies. So at the same time, I think, of course, internally, these companies can also adopt some kind of tiering to kind of see which area are they more ready. A phased approach, as we mentioned many times, it's never too late or too early to start, right? So I think it's better to start doing something with what you have now. So I think, yeah, that's more for, of course, at the end of the day, not waiting for the regulatory requirements and deadlines
mm.
to hit you, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. Mun-Wei, if we kind of look at the carbon side and back to sort of GHG, can you explain a little bit about hotspot analysis and where do you suggest companies start, and what are some of maybe the big emission areas that commonly get missed in that process?
Yeah. Okay. So hotspots are basically the categories of Scope 3 emissions that are salient, right? Say for your company. So I would suggest that companies start by doing two things. So one is really take a look at your own industry, right? So because because why you need to do that is because the relativity between Scope 1 plus 2 versus Scope 3 is to a very large extent industry specific. Yeah. Say as a general rule, the more companies involved in extraction, manufacturing, or direct operations, so the higher your Scope 1 and 2 relative to your Scope 3. So, but conversely, if you are very reliant on a very complex supply chain, or you sell your distributor products, then your Scope 3 will very likely dwarf your Scope 1 and Scope 2. Yeah. So really one is to look at your industry type. Say for instance, if you are in utilities, then your Scope 1 and 2 will be dominant. But if you are in consumer FMCG, then your Scope 3 will be dominant. Okay, so and then use that as a starting point. And then the second step is then to look at your large industry peers emissions, right? So because why you look at your large industry peers in Singapore as well as elsewhere is really because these large companies are very likely to be reporting their Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And because we've done that for some of our clients, so then we realized that say for instance, we've done reporting for some mining companies in the region, and then we look at the big players, right? Your Rio Tinto and so on, and of course their emissions dwarf, right, the regional players, but that's it. But the characteristics are quite similar, right? So with that in mind, then that will actually help you, right, inform upon what your emissions profile is likely to be. Yeah. Okay. So then, then maybe to just in general, based on our practice in helping with companies, I would say we have worked with companies so for which the purchase goods and services is a very big category, right? And again, it was really through benchmarking as well as doing some kind of establishing a simple baseline based using the spend approach based on the data that the companies can give us, right? So then conversely, if you look at, let's say, some other, like if you look at IKEA, for instance, they publish they have a very detailed carbon report every year, and then they're actually the use of their products, actually, because they also sell a lot of electrical goods. Yeah, and that is quite a salient part of their emissions profile. Yeah. So just to recap, it's fairly industry. Two takeaway points. So one is that understand your industry, right? And second thing is that do some benchmarking against companies, your peers, your industry peers that have published comprehensive emission profile, because very likely your emissions profile will be very similar to theirs. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so predominantly we're talking today about, carbon emission scope 3 hotspots, but you can also extend that to sort of ESG risk hotspot analysis. And it doesn't necessarily always correlate a high carbon emission hotspot to an ESG risk hotspot as well. So there's additional layers to think through, but obviously the focus today is really more around the carbon emissions piece. And it's another great area where you can use software just to help look at your supply chain, and then look at using tools and algorithms and AI as well to help figure out different areas where you might want to engage suppliers for more data, or engage them on reduction planning or what have you, or maybe some advice around maybe moving from another supplier to another. So there's an example there on the screen from one of our tools there in Workiva there as well. Let's shift the conversation to, we've talked about carbon, but then a little bit about ethical sourcing. In Casey, how do you see the audit and assurance frameworks helping companies clean up their supply chain and reduce ESG risk?
Yeah. So we spoke about the different frameworks. So maybe starting with GRI, which in Singapore, it was first adopted for SR reporting, right? So even at the GRI level, we are looking at a number of factors that relate to Scope 3 emissions. So specifically, just quoting off from the GRI standards, 305-3. So it requires companies to report other indirect Scope 3 GHG emissions, right? Then you have got 308, new supplies have to be screened using environmental criteria. And then 308-2, negative environmental impact in supply chain and actions taken. And then you have 409, that is on disclosing any significant risk for incidents of forced or compulsory labor, right? So you can see that, these are actually quite mandatory in a way. If it happens, you will need to actually disclose this, and then all this relates to Scope 3 emissions kind of information. So, and of course, then with TCFD, you need to assess the climate risk and opportunities, and then it also says maybe you have to report on Scope 1, 2, but it says Scope 3 is not mandatory. Then of course, when S1 and S2 is introduced, it mandates Scope 3 to be disclosed and reported. So I think definitely you can see how these frameworks and standards do set the criteria for companies to at least dive deeper into their supply chain, to kind of force them to relook at whether these suppliers are whether they have the sourcing is ethical, right? And then there's to avoid those suppliers who are engaged in some of these socially unacceptable practices. Yep. So yeah, I mean, to answer that, this is the whole purpose of the standards and frameworks, to kind of of course the original intention is to enhance reporting, but I think that helps to clean up their supply chain and reduce ESG risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Munwei, do you see ethical sourcing as like more than just a social issue, but also a material risk for Singaporean companies? And if so, why?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I think first and foremost, Singapore is an island, so we import most things, right? Say, for instance, 90% of our 90% of our food is imported, right? So because of that, then the way I look at it is really, I would look at sourcing. Ethical sourcing is really part of sourcing, and it's really part of business continuity, right? Say for instance, and why we should take a kind of a holistic look is that, say for example, if your suppliers, your critical suppliers, say embroiled in some fraud, or they face some safety related stop work order in their home country, and they cannot fulfill their deliveries, right, then you'll definitely impact your business, right? So that's why it's actually important, right, to particularly for your key suppliers, is really to get to know them well, and if possible, also make it part and parcel of your business to go and visit them, right? Make some short trips, so at least you understand how they handle their supply chains, right? So whether in terms of all these things and also these points are listed here, and also kind of tapping on some of the existing reporting frameworks, right? So because say the GRI frameworks are not only for reporting, but they also we can also use it as a checklist in terms of what are some of the ESG related risks that we need to look out for when we are doing our due diligence on our suppliers. Yeah.
Yeah, good. We touched on tools, throughout the session, and I think tools help, obviously on a number of sides, but then aligning to a lot of these frameworks, and so kind of standardizing the report out of your data around that. So one way, like, how do you see, with your clients, digital tools, making Scope 3 reporting and analysis more achievable, especially for SMEs?
Yeah, I would say that the tools are getting better all the time, and also the prices, because of the competition, the prices have also been going down. So really, I would say perhaps they offer three advantages for SMEs as well as all other companies, the big companies. So one is really in terms of automation, right? So because the platforms can actually pull data from all your various systems, your accounting systems, your HR systems, and so on, right? And some of the carbon platforms also have built-in emission factors updated regularly. So then that way it saves you the trouble of having to search for the relevant emission factors. Yeah. And also with the advent of AI, some of the platforms also they can do the analysis, they can do the charting, and they also can do some reporting for you. They can at least give you a first cut narrative to work on, right? So the automation. Second thing is that because these are actually workflow tools, so then it also allows you to manage your external partners, including your suppliers, right? So including say just pressing a button and the templates get sent out without you having to send individual emails to chase and so on, right? So essentially is they help you the project management, and the third advantage which arguably is really critical is also in terms of the accuracy and audit trail, right? So because all the data is stored in the platform, so there is this single source of truth, right? And then there's also a clear audit trail, right? So versus really the existing and older method of really exchanging data through emails, through spreadsheets, and so on. Yeah. So and in general, we always encourage our clients to consider using kind of a web-based platform. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few examples there in Workiva Carbon. You can do the supplier engagement in the platform there, and send out your requests, and obviously uses AI for those that are already disclosing to bring in their data in there, and you can do your ESG and emissions reporting there. But yeah, Casey, from your experience there, like if we kind of take a look at it from a sort of an audit and assurance angle, what are some of the benefits you see in clients that are using software to drive this activity?
Right. Okay. I think there are two parts here, right? So in terms of the operational efficiency, right? So there's a lot of because for most organizations, you do not have a dedicated ESG department, right, or resource. At least I think for the bigger ones, maybe the STI constituents, yeah, maybe they have a team, right? So I think this is also one challenge, and for that and usually the responsibility is kind of subsumed under the finance accounting department. So and of course, these people they have to go around collating or collecting the data from the various divisions, and the process can be very manual. And these are then summarized in Excel worksheets. So I think from the efficiency point of view, I think it's operationally very time consuming, right? So and also even for the users, the respective departments to be providing data, it can even also take up some of their time. So I think it's actually good to have some platform system where the users themselves can go in and, say for example, if we are tracking air travel, right? So the whenever there's any employee who flew on a business trip, they just have to, key in the so-called the destination, right? And then what class of
Mm.
flight, and then the system will capture the mouse. They don't even need to key in the mouse. It will capture convert the mouse, estimate the mouse and convert it to carbon emission, and that will be captured. So I mean, it really saves a lot of, time in collecting this data. So I think this is something that we see some companies doing, and it really helps a lot in terms of data accuracy and also the audit trail later on. I think these systems can even facilitate the uploading of your, the air tickets, e-tickets, or even boarding pass, so that the auditors can have a very good documentary trail when they're performing the audit.
Absolutely, 100%. So yeah, it's definitely great when the auditors can get in at that granular level and see how the calculations have been made and the emission factors libraries that you're referencing, etc. So that's great. So just moving beyond compliance. Mong Wei, why is voluntary action, important for internal capability? Because this is something we're trying to encourage in the industry, right? Is not just waiting and sitting on our hands, but doing something. So what are your thoughts there to help stay ahead of the market?
Yeah, I think the list is pretty comprehensive. So maybe I just one thing to add, which is that really a kind of early kind of analysis and risk assessment is also a form of R&D, right? Research and development. In that, so at least you know what are some of the short-term, medium-term, and long-term challenges to your business, and then you can innovate accordingly. So maybe I give an example. So before I started SustainableSG, I was working in Sentosa Development Corporation. And then because my team and I, we look after sustainability for the organization and the island. And then we noticed that the weather patterns were getting more erratic. Yeah, so then what we did was that we actually bought very granular weather data from the local Met, right? And then we did an analysis, and true enough, the predictability of weather patterns have really gone wonky over the years. Okay, so so we look at that as we treated that as an enterprise risk, as a long-term enterprise risk, and then in one of our brainstorming sessions, then this was discussed, and then one of the takeaways was that we felt that Sentosa needed to develop more indoor attractions for families. Yeah. And eventually that actually culminated in the development of a shell. So and whereby we eventually got Kidzania as an operator. Yeah. So then to some extent, so Kidzania has recently restarted on Sentosa, so every time I go back, I'm very proud, right? I mean, I'm quite that so that really there was the genesis of it was really linked to kind of a climate and enterprise risk assessment exercise that we did, almost like 10 years or so ago. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm smiling a little bit because, using that example there of erratic weather patterns a few hours ago, that here in Australia where I am at the moment, there was a big storm that came through that wasn't being predicted, and if you saw me, I was dripping wet because I got caught in the middle of it. So That's certainly patterns are changing there. For SMEs that want a bit of support there in Singapore, there's a great website there, and we'll send this out with the slide deck. There is the SME Sustainability gov.sg site, and that will give you some really useful information there around resources that are available to SMEs, and then also some grants that are potentially available for you to leverage internally, but then also with providers that can help you out. So I'd encourage everyone to go and have a look at how the government can support you there. We've got a little bit of time for questions. There's none in the chat, but feel free. Is there anybody that feel free to put something in the chat or ask the panel a question by taking yourself off mute? Looks like we had some good engagement on the poll and a reasonably good turnout today, which is good considering as we're moving towards Christmas, everyone tends to get really busy with lots of different things and towards the end of the year. So maybe if there's no questions there, maybe to both of you, Casey first, what's one thing that you might leave participants with in terms of one thing to start with this next week or two that might make a difference for them in working on engaging their supply chain?
So I think the key takeaway would be really, the advice that early adopters would gain competitive advantage, as we have discussed. It's not just compliance, but even the way the standard is crafted, it looks at both risks and opportunities. So I think it's not just about risk, and we hope that by embracing the ESG carbon reporting, that would give rise to more opportunities, whether in areas of cost savings or new business opportunities. So I think businesses should view that more positively than just from the compliance angle.
Great. Mun Wei, what about yourself? What would be the one key takeaway you'd like to leave with the participants?
Yeah, I would say I would strongly encourage everyone that for your upcoming meetings with your partners and suppliers, right? So whether before Christmas or in the new year, then make it a point to put it down on your agenda, right? To discuss emissions and ESG, right? So of course it could be kind of framed as something open-ended, right? Say, and a good way to start is always about the weather, right? So as Joe pointed out, in fact, last week I was in KL, and in fact, Malaysia is now going through quite severe flooding because of the monsoon, right? So start talking on it, right? So then, because really these are real business issues, right? So I think increasingly, so that's why we are all here, because climate change and other ESG risks are no longer far away issues. They are existential. They are now. So we need to engage our partners and then work out solutions together. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that's been a jam-packed 1 hour. I want to thank you very much, KC and Mun Wei, for your time, and for participants that have turned up. And we'll send out all of those resources, Unitive Impact and the team here, and SustainableSG and Foo Kon Tan are always here to help in your efforts in the Singapore and ASEAN and broader markets there. So feel free to reach out at any time. Hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day and their evening, and we look forward to staying in touch. Thank you, everyone.